Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
They say you only marry the family if you marry the man. Well, they forgot to tell me it's the family that will eat you alive first, one forkful at a time, all while smiling that bright, venom-dripping smile only years of resentment can sharpen. I stood in the middle of a living room that reeked of lavender candles and forced affection, clutching a glass of cheap champagne like it was a life raft, and tried not to drown in the syrupy fake laughter that bounced off the pastel walls. The air was thick with perfume and tension, the kind that pressed on your lungs and made breathing feel like a conscious effort. There were balloons that said bride-to-be in curly gold letters floating above the fireplace, surrounded by those artificial flowers that always look alive from a distance, but up close smell like dust and sadness. Margaret Whitmore, Maggie, as everyone in the family affectionately called her, though there was nothing affectionate about her, floated from group to group, her pearls practically strangling her neck, her laugh a little too shrill, her smile a little too sharp. She was like a shark wrapped in pink chiffon. I had spent months telling myself it was just nerves, that she didn't mean anything by her little comments, that it was all in my head. That time she joked that I must have been raised by wolves because I ate pizza with my hands at a family dinner. That time she suggested maybe a smaller wedding would be more appropriate given my background. That time she loudly asked Daniel if he was sure he was ready for a lifetime of Walmart Christmases. Each time, Daniel would pat my hand or kiss my cheek and say, "That's just mom being mom," as if that made it okay, as if that made me feel any less small. Today, though, something felt different. Maggie had been on edge since the moment I arrived, fluttering around like a hummingbird on Red Bull, whispering in corners, her smile tightening whenever our eyes met. My best friend Lisa had caught my eye across the room and raised an eyebrow, mouthing, "You good?" I had nodded, lying with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of swallowing down your feelings to keep the peace. The gifts were piled up on a card table sagging under the weight of glittery wrapping paper and bows big enough to smother a toddler. Every time I opened a present, the room would burst into exaggerated ohs and ahs, even if it was just a pot holder shaped like a rooster or a chipped teacup from someone's attic. I thanked everyone too brightly, feeling my cheeks ache from the strain of keeping the smile plastered on my face. And then it happened. I was reaching for a silver box wrapped with precision only a department store employee could achieve when I heard it clear as day, slicing through the polite hum of chatter and clinking glasses like a knife through fondant. "She'll never be good enough for our family," Maggie whispered, her voice just loud enough to carry over the noise, just soft enough to pretend she hadn't meant for it to be heard. She was standing with Daniel's Aunt Carol, who immediately stiffened and gave a nervous glance in my direction, but Maggie didn't notice or didn't care. She sipped her mimosa with that same smug smile, like she'd just confirmed something everyone else already knew. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the rush of blood to my face, feel the icy pinch at the back of my neck. I looked down at the gift in my hands, something expensive and fragile, I was sure, and wondered what would happen if I just hurled it across the room. Shards of glass, screams, chaos. It would feel so good, just for a second. Instead, I smiled. Not the wide, toothy, eager-to-please smile they were used to. No. This smile was tight and small and dangerous, the kind of smile you give right before you tear the whole damn thing down. My fingers tightened around the ribbon as I turned back toward the center of the room, where all the expectant eyes were waiting for me to play my part, to be the grateful little bride-to-be. I opened the box, revealing a set of bone china dishes, and gave an appropriately delighted gasp. Everyone clapped. Maggie beamed from across the room, believing she had won, believing I had swallowed her poison and begged for more. I caught Lisa's eye again. She wasn't smiling. That's when I decided. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't throw a tantrum and give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. No, I would do something much better. Much worse. Something she wouldn't see coming in a million years. And it would start today. The champagne tasted sweeter somehow as I raised my glass and toasted the room, my heart hammering in my chest with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Somewhere deep inside me, a door slammed shut, locking away the part of me that still cared about fitting into a family that would never make room for me. Let them underestimate me. Let them whisper behind their hands and exchange pitying glances. They had no idea what was coming. And Maggie, poor Maggie, had just made the worst mistake of her life. I stood there in that stifling room, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free from the pretty lace dress I had so carefully chosen for the occasion, willing myself not to react, not to let the heat rising up my neck and burning my face betray the war raging inside me. I smiled, I laughed, I accepted another flute of watery champagne from Lisa's outstretched hand with a nod of thanks that probably looked way too sharp, but no one seemed to notice because everyone was too busy pretending everything was just perfect. Like the party decorations that looked ready to fall off the walls at the slightest breeze. There were at least 35 people crammed into that tiny living room, or at least that's what it felt like, though realistically it might have been closer to 15 if I was actually counting heads. But when you're drowning in tight smiles and false congratulations, every new body feels like another anchor dragging you down. The walls themselves seemed to close in with every second I stood there, the flowery wallpaper curling at the edges like even it was trying to escape the suffocating fakeness of it all. I shifted my weight from one aching foot to the other, the stupid white heels I had bought for the shower digging into my skin, and I let my mind drift, maybe just to survive a little longer, maybe just to remember why this moment hurt as much as it did. This wasn't the first time Maggie had chipped away at me in public, after all. This wasn't even the worst thing she had said. There was that time 2 months ago at Daniel's birthday dinner, when Maggie had lifted her wine glass toward me and, in front of his entire extended family, toasted to a girl who knows how to stretch a dollar. After I brought a homemade cake instead of buying something from that overpriced bakery she loved so much. The room had gone silent for a second, and then everyone laughed, because what else could they do but laugh along when the queen bee made her little stingers seem like compliments? Or the time at the engagement party, when she had pulled Daniel aside, not me, never me, and said, loud enough for me to catch every word, that it was sweet, I wanted a career instead of focusing on starting a real family. Like being a lawyer made me somehow defective as a future wife. Daniel had patted my back awkwardly afterward and said, babe, she just has high standards, don't take it personally, and I had swallowed my pride and nodded because fighting wasn't worth it, not when the prize was getting closer to him. But now, standing there under the scrutiny of Maggie's sharp eyes and the brittle approval of her circle of pearl-wearing, gin-sipping clones, I realized that every insult I had let slide off my back hadn't actually slid anywhere. It had pooled deep inside, thick and bitter, waiting for its moment to boil over. Lisa bumped my elbow gently, snapping me out of my spiral, and when I glanced at her, I could see it, she knew. She had heard it too, or at least she had seen the way I flinched, the way my whole body tensed like a rabbit sniffing out a trap. I gave her the smallest of nods, nothing anyone else would notice, and forced another brittle laugh when Daniel's cousin Marcy cracked some joke about bridesmaids' dresses being designed as a cruel punishment for women everywhere. I knew what I should do. I should keep smiling. I should keep pretending. I should take the high road, be the bigger person, all those cliches that are supposed to make you feel morally superior while you get crushed under the weight of other people's cruelty. I could hear my mother's voice in my head, not Maggie, but my real mother, telling me, don't let them see you break, sweetheart, never give them that satisfaction. And yet something coiled inside me, something fierce and sharp-edged that had been waiting for permission to unfurl. I wasn't going to scream or cry or throw a fit, no. That would be too easy for them to dismiss, to chalk up to me being too sensitive or too emotional or whatever other label they slapped on women who refused to swallow their pain quietly. No, I was going to play a different game. I reached for another gift from the stack, something wrapped in silver paper and tied with a ribbon so elaborate it looked like a damn science project, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of Maggie watching me from across the room. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands folded neatly in front of her like she was posing for a family portrait, but her eyes were glittering with satisfaction. She thought she had one. She thought I would tuck my tail between my legs, smile sweetly, and spend the rest of my life trying to win scraps of approval from her table. She thought wrong, because today was not just a bridal shower. Today was the day I decided I was done playing nice. I was going to hit back, but not the way she would expect. Not with shouting, not with tears. No, I was going to do it with something much better. With a smile just as sweet as hers and a truth just as sharp as a blade. And when I was done, Maggie Whitmore would wish she had never opened her mouth in the first place. I sat there with my knees pressed tightly together, delicate fingers tugging absent-mindedly at the hem of my ivory lace dress, and all the while a current of electricity hummed beneath my skin, an invisible vibration that no one else seemed to notice. The chatter around me was just noise now, a meaningless symphony of small talk and forced laughter, the kind of white noise that could drive a person insane if they let it in too deeply. Every fake smile, every polite chuckle, every clink of glass felt like one more weight added to my chest, but I wasn't sinking today. Not anymore. Today, I was floating just above the chaos, out of reach of their little jabs and cutting looks. Gift after gift was shoved into my lap with eager hands and expectant eyes, and I unwrapped each one with the kind of theatrical gratitude that belonged on a bad soap opera, gushing over monogrammed towels and hand-embroidered throw pillows like they were treasures pulled straight from King Midas's vault. I even clutched a set of silver-plated measuring spoons to my chest like they had cured cancer, drawing out a chorus of "Voss" and "Isn't she just precious?" from Maggie's friends who were too busy sipping their fourth glasses of mimosas to notice the thin layer of frost growing in my smile. They didn't see it, but Lisa did. She sat perched on the arm of the couch, legs crossed neatly, swirling her champagne absent-mindedly, while her eyes followed me, sharp and knowing. She caught me slipping once, when I opened a hideous crystal figurine shaped like a swan, and my mouth twitched in disgust before I could slap the smile back in place, and she gave a tiny shake of her head, warning me to stay on script. Not yet. Not yet. The truth of it buzzed against my teeth. I had a secret, a shiny, ugly little thing tucked away behind my teeth and beneath my ribs, a secret that could take this whole picture-perfect family and shatter it like a champagne flute dropped on tile. And the most delicious part? They had handed it to me without even realizing it, like fools laying a loaded gun in a child's crib and walking away whistling. It had happened a few months back, during one of those endless wedding planning afternoons that Maggie insisted on hosting, under the pretense of helping, but really just an excuse to mold me into a more suitable future Mrs. Whitmore. She had handed me a stack of paperwork, invoices, guest lists, vendor contracts, and asked me to just sort through it, dear, while she took a phone call that dragged on for nearly an hour. I had been sifting through piles of receipts when I found it, a manila envelope tucked between florists' quotes and linen swatches, completely out of place. It wasn't wedding-related. It wasn't even remotely innocent. Inside were financial statements, and what caught my eye first was the string of donation receipts made out to a charity I knew for a fact didn't exist. Curiosity had gotten the better of me, or maybe it was survival instinct, and within minutes, I realized the Whitmore family's charitable foundation was nothing more than a clever front. They were funneling money through it, shifting numbers around, dodging taxes in ways that would make any IRS agent foam at the mouth. I had snapped pictures on my phone, fingers trembling slightly, heart hammering in my ears so loudly I thought for sure Maggie would come bursting into the room and catch me in the act. But she didn't. She had no idea. And neither did Daniel, I was almost certain, unless he was a much better liar than I had ever given him credit for. Afterward, I told myself I would forget about it. That I would delete the pictures, pretend I hadn't seen anything, focus on the future I was building with Daniel, because love was supposed to conquer all, wasn't it? But deep down I knew better. Love doesn't conquer betrayal. Love doesn't survive under a mountain of lies. Love sure as hell doesn't grow in poisoned soil. So I had kept the pictures. And today, sitting here, opening hand towels and slow cookers and cake stands, I knew exactly what I was going to do with them. The room blurred around the edges as I unwrapped another present, a hideous ceramic serving platter shaped like a turkey, from Maggie herself, and Lisa caught my eye again. She set down her glass, leaned in close enough that her breath stirred the tiny hairs at my temple, and with a grin that could cut glass, she whispered, "You sure you're ready to set this bomb off?" I didn't answer out loud. I just smiled, the kind of slow, dangerous smile that made Lisa lean back with a soft, delighted laugh. The kind of smile that meant someone's world was about to burn. The longer I sat there, the heavier the room seemed to grow, the warm, perfumed air pressing down on my skin like a heavy velvet curtain, suffocating and inescapable. The laughter around me was getting sharper, brittle in a way that made my teeth ache, and underneath it all there was a tension so tight you could practically hear it humming in the walls, like a taut wire stretched to the point of snapping. Maggie had grown bolder with every glass of champagne, her words dripping with the kind of faux sweetness that cut deeper than outright cruelty ever could, the kind that left invisible wounds you only felt when you were alone, replaying them over and over in your mind at 3 a.m. She circled the room like a cat with a half-dead mouse, making snide little comments that floated just loud enough to be heard by the right ears and just soft enough to pretend innocence. "Of course, not everyone is raised to appreciate crystal," she said with a laugh when I opened a set of wine glasses, and I caught the way Aunt Carol's eyes darted nervously toward me before fixing themselves on her drink. "We all know Emily's taste runs a little rustic," she added later, when I admired a handmade quilt gifted by one of my cousins, the word rustic hitting the air like a slap, and this time even Lisa flinched beside me. There was a moment, maybe a second, maybe a lifetime, when I could have still walked away from it, could have smiled, could have bitten my tongue until it bled and swallowed every insult the way I had been trained to do since I was old enough to understand that sometimes survival meant silence. But something in me, something old and fierce and tired of shrinking to make other people comfortable, something that had been growing ever since I found that manila envelope months ago, whispered that this was the moment I had been waiting for. I set down the hideous turkey platter on the nearest table, ignoring the smattering of polite applause that followed, and rose slowly to my feet, feeling every pair of eyes in the room turn toward me like sunflowers tracking the sun. My heart was a drum in my chest, fast and relentless, but my hands were steady as I lifted my champagne glass high above my head, the bubbles catching the light like tiny, fleeting stars. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice clear and ringing through the room, slicing cleanly through the low murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware against china. A hush fell, broken only by the rustling of taffeta dresses and the wet smack of lipstick against glass rims as everyone raised their drinks in my direction, expectant and eager for another round of pretty words to wrap around the ugliness brewing just beneath the surface. I started slow, savoring every second, every heartbeat, every strained smile. "I just want to thank all of you," I said, letting my gaze sweep the room, landing briefly on each painted face, for welcoming me into the Whitmore family with such warmth and kindness. I let the words linger, heavy and sweet as syrup, thick enough that even the dullest guest could sense the sarcasm curling underneath. Some faces lit up with confused smiles, others twitched with dawning suspicion, but Maggie, oh Maggie, just smiled back at me with that thin-lipped, brittle expression that told me she thought I was finally falling into line. "I know," I continued, "that blending two families isn't always easy, especially when one side has such a proud legacy to uphold." I saw Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat, his smile faltering, and out of the corner of my eye, Lisa gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Keep going," it said. "Finish it." "And it's in the spirit of family," I said, lifting my glass a little higher, that I thought I'd share a little fun fact I learned while helping Daniel organize some wedding paperwork. There was a ripple of polite laughter, half-hearted and unsure, but I pressed forward, savoring the growing unease that thickened the air until it was almost difficult to breathe. "Did you all know," I said brightly, as if I were sharing a juicy piece of gossip about a celebrity, "that the Whitmore Foundation, the charity everyone here has so generously supported, is actually not a charity at all?" A few heads cocked to the side in confusion, a few brows furrowed, but Maggie's smile didn't falter. "Not yet." In fact, I went on, pausing just long enough to feel the silence stretch and quiver between us. "It's been used to launder money for years. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled through fake donations and ghost programs that never existed. It's really quite clever, honestly, if it weren't, completely illegal." The words dropped into the room like a boulder into a still pond, sending shockwaves of silence and horror radiating outward. A fork clattered to the floor somewhere behind me. Aunt Carol gasped audibly. Someone coughed, a harsh, panicked sound that broke the paralysis hanging over the room. Maggie's face drained of color so fast it was almost impressive, her lipstick standing out stark and garish against the sudden pallor of her skin. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no sound came out, and for the first time since I had met her, the great and terrible Maggie Whitmore was speechless. Daniel stared at me like I had sprouted horns, his hands frozen halfway through setting down his drink, his mouth working uselessly like a man trying to catch words that refused to form. I didn't lower my glass. I didn't back down. Instead, I smiled, a real smile, wide and bright and filled with something fierce and electric, and took a long, slow sip of champagne as Maggie shoved back her chair with a screech of wood on tile and bolted from the room, her heels clicking frantically against the floor as she fled, tears streaming down her face. And just like that, the queen had fallen. The silence that settled over the room after Maggie's hurried exit was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed against my ears and chest until I thought I might choke on it. No one moved at first. It was as if the very oxygen had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind only the faint, sickly sweet scent of champagne and wilting roses. Eyes darted around nervously, avoiding mine, as if looking directly at me might somehow make them complicit in what had just happened, might drag them into the vortex I had created with a few well-placed words and a single raised glass. One by one, people began to stir, their movements awkward and jerky like puppets with tangled strings, mumbling flimsy excuses about early mornings and prior commitments as they grabbed their coats and purses with trembling hands. The carefully arranged presents sat abandoned on the table like relics from a happier time, and the soft, sticky pop music that had been playing in the background now sounded grotesque, an inappropriate soundtrack to the wreckage of what was supposed to have been a celebration. Daniel's face was a mask of disbelief as he finally broke through the paralysis and came striding toward me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek, his hands balled into fists at his sides. For a split second, a cowardly part of me hoped he was coming to defend me, to wrap his arms around me and say, "Thank you for standing up for yourself, for standing up for us." But deep down, I already knew better. I had always known better. "What the hell was that, Emily?" he hissed, low enough that only I and maybe Lisa, still perched silently by the window, could hear. His voice was sharp, cutting through me like a knife, each word carrying an accusation. I wasn't sure I had the strength to answer. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out at first, only a hoarse croak that I quickly swallowed down. I lifted my chin instead, steeling myself against the fury radiating off of him in waves, and forced the words out in a voice that shook less than I expected. "I told the truth," I said simply, because that was all there was to say, really. Everything else was just window dressing. Daniel's laugh was short and humorless, the kind of laugh that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You humiliated my mother," he said, jabbing a finger toward the door where Maggie had fled like a wounded animal. "You embarrassed our entire family." I almost laughed myself then, a wild, hysterical sound that I barely managed to choke down. Our family. As if I had ever really been part of it, as if I had ever been anything more than a tolerated outsider, an interloper they hoped to shape into something acceptable or else quietly discard when the time came. She humiliated herself, I said, my voice growing steadier with every word. I just held up the mirror. He shook his head, disgust etched into every line of his face, and I saw then that there would be no coming back from this, no tearful apologies or careful explanations that could bridge the chasm yawning between us. Not when he was still so firmly shackled to the image of his mother as the gracious matriarch, the benevolent queen, rather than the petty, vicious woman who had spent the last year trying to carve me into something more palatable. You could have handled it differently, he said bitterly. You could have talked to me. I tried, I said, and this time I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice if I tried. God knows I tried, Daniel. You didn't want to hear it. There it was, naked and ugly between us, the truth we had both been dancing around for months, pretending it wasn't there, pretending love could smother it into submission. I don't remember who turned away first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. Maybe we both realized at the same time that there was nothing left to salvage here, no common ground left to stand on. I only know that when I turned, I found myself face to face with Grandma June, who had watched the whole debacle from her seat near the fireplace, her gnarled hands folded neatly in her lap and a faint, inscrutable smile playing on her thin lips. She reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength for someone so frail, pulling me down until her mouth was close to my ear. Her voice was low and rough, but steady, carrying a weight that made my heart stutter in my chest. You only said what we all knew, she murmured, her breath hot against my skin. Some cancers need cutting. I pulled back and met her eyes, searching for mockery, for judgment, for any sign that she was just another Whitmore loyalist, but all I found there was tired resignation and something that looked a little like gratitude. It was then that I realized not everyone in this family had been blind to Maggie's rot. Some had simply been too afraid, too worn down, too beaten to speak the truth out loud. I nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion, and turned away before I could lose my nerve. The engagement ring was heavy in my pocket as I walked back to the gift table, my feet silent on the polished floor, and with a care I didn't feel, I pulled it out and placed it on top of the pile of unopened presents, where it gleamed under the harsh overhead lights like a tiny, bitter monument to everything that had been lost. I didn't look back as I left the house, didn't glance over my shoulder to see Daniel's reaction, didn't wait to hear if anyone called after me. I stepped into the cold afternoon light, drawing in a deep, shaking breath that tasted like freedom and ashes, and climbed into my car with hands that barely trembled at all. I didn't know where I was going yet. I only knew it was somewhere else. Somewhere I could breathe again. Maybe I wasn't good enough for them. But maybe, just maybe, they were never good enough for me either.